decided that I was just going to stop YouTube. And then, like 2 days later, I started getting this flood of subscribers. I had no idea why. And then one of them commented and said, "Hey, I found you through Soft ASMR." She gave your channel a shout out. And I was like, what? Somebody, like a big YouTuber, knows who I am. So basically, Sam is the reason I am still here today doing true crime. She is the absolute sweetest girl. She does a lot of true crime on her channel, but she also does a lot of other types of ASMR videos, so make sure to go check her out and subscribe. She actually has part 1 of this video, so you're gonna have to go check her out. I will leave the link up above. Head over to part 1. So I am just going to give my usual disclaimer here. These videos are not intended for children under the age of 14 due to the nature of true crime. Viewer discretion is advised. Okay, so we are gonna go ahead and start right where Soft ASMR left off. It's March 2003, and Laci's case is kind of going a little bit cold. Not in the media, but police don't really have any leads. They know Scott did this, or they suspect that Scott is behind Laci's disappearance, but they have no physical evidence to tie him to it. They have no bodies. The investigation is kind of just stopped until April of 2003. And this is when the body of Connor Peterson is found on the 13th. There were 2 people out walking their dog in the San Francisco Bay, like along the shore, and they found the body of a late-term male fetus. The next day, another person walking about a mile from this location found the torso of a pregnant woman wearing beige maternity pants. I am not going to go into super graphic detail about the condition of their bodies, but it was bad. The reality is just heartbreaking, and it was believed that they had been in the water for several months, exposed to the elements. Autopsies were done, and the remains were positively identified as Connor and Laci Peterson. While Laci's body was in very bad condition, Connor's was in much better condition. The coroner believed that he had been protected from the elements because he was still in his mother's womb. So basically, they believed that when Laci went into the water, she was still pregnant. But because of the condition of her body, they were unable to determine exactly how long she had been in the water, how long Connor had been in the water, and they were unable to determine a cause of death. The autopsies were done on April 18th, and this is the same day that police secure a arrest warrant for Scott Peterson. Scott had told police that he had gone fishing on the day that Laci went missing, and the area he told them he had been fishing wasn't far from where the bodies were recovered. Now, over the last few months, police had been tracking Scott Peterson. They had tapped his cell phone, they were listening to everything he was saying, and they always knew where he was. So they get the arrest warrant, and they go to arrest him. And they find Scott driving on the freeway down in San Diego. He is speeding. He's driving erratically, and police are there. They are following him. And it looks like he's making a run for Mexico. I guess the police followed Scott for quite a while. This was not like a 10-minute follow before they arrested him. I think they followed him for several hours. They kind of wanted to see where he was going, what he was gonna do. News that bodies had been found had been released to the media, and most people assumed that it was Laci and Connor, but this information had not yet been confirmed by police. So police finally pull Scott over. He's about an hour away from the California-Mexico border. He was driving a red Mercedes-Benz, and they find so many suspicious things in his car when they arrest him. So in his car, they find camping gear, 4 cell phones, his brother's ID, $15,000 in cash, hiking boots, a shovel, some sort of like knife, his mother's name off of his account. So she's at the bank and they give her $10,000 out of his account. So basically, as soon as Scott realizes that his mother has withdrawn $10,000 from his and Laci's account, he calls her and she goes back to the bank, or her bank. I'm not sure if they were two separate banks. Takes the money out and gives it to Scott. This was the day before he was arrested. Scott was arrested on Good Friday, and the banks were closed, so that's how they explain this $15,000 in cash. Now, just me, I don't know. I would have maybe got a certified check or something to give him. I think it's extremely weird that these people are dealing in cash, such large amounts of cash. The day before Connor was found, Scott buys this red Mercedes Benz, and so his family points to this and says, if he was running away to a different country, why would he buy a cherry red sports car? He was definitely not making a run. He says that he'd been living in San Diego for a while. The reason he was speeding and driving so erratically was because he believed that there were media following him, and he was trying to get away from them. They ended up being unmarked police cars. Now, something that I think was kind of good for Scott was he was heading to go meet his family, his brother and his dad, to go golfing when he was pulled over. And he had made a phone call to them and said, hey, look, the media's following me. I'm not gonna come. I think that if they get pictures of me golfing, they'll be all over the newspapers, and I'm not gonna come. So police did have this conversation. So when they arrest him, he tells them, I was gonna go golfing. I stopped by my brother's house and got his ID, because if you are a resident of San Diego, you get a discount at the golf course that they were planning on going to. So that was why he had the ID. He said the knife found in his car was there when he bought it 2 days ago. And the man that he bought the car from did say, yeah, that actually was mine, and I forgot about it and left it in there. So he basically kind of has an explanation for everything. Police did believe that he was planning on going to Amber's house, and that's why he had the printout of her, neighborhood. Now there are two things that Scott could have been doing. He could have been going there to do something to Amber. After all, as soon as she came out and told the police and the public that she was having an affair, that's when everyone really turned on Scott Peterson. But that wouldn't have been very smart, because everyone was already watching him. A lot of people theorized that he was gonna go to Amber's house and beg her to run to Mexico with him. Scott was arraigned and charged on April 21st, 2003, on 2 counts of premeditated murder with special circumstances. These special circumstances would allow the state to seek the death penalty if he was found guilty. On June was not also involved. This was, I think, the court's attempt at trying to give Scott a fair trial, but because of how big this case was, Scott was never going to get a fair trial. On October 23rd, 2003, the preliminary trial began, and this was when the DNA and forensic evidence was presented. Every single piece of evidence that the prosecution had was circumstantial. Some of the circumstantial evidence presented was Scott's, bizarre behavior after Laci went missing. They laid out all of Scott's lies. He lied about so many things in this case. He lied about the timeline. He lied about where he was that morning because he had initially told police he was golfing and then told him he was fishing. He lied about his whereabouts when Laci went missing, and he lied about his relationship with Amber Fry. I guess at one point he was asked point blank, "Is there anything in your relationship that we should know about?" And he said no. He also had told police that the morning Laci went missing, they had been at home. She had been watching Martha Stewart, and she was learning how to make meringue, and then the prosecution said, "Look, we watched that Martha Stewart episode and they didn't even bring up meringue at all, so he's obviously lying." It's at this point that the prosecution says they believe that Scott actually killed Laci the night before she supposedly went missing. So, I guess Laci had this favorite necklace and favorite ring that she wore everywhere. She jury pool was tainted across America. They did end up moving his trial to Redwood City, California. Jury selection began on March 4th. The judge asked all of the potential jurors about their stance on the death penalty. He wanted to know if they would be able to, vote to put a human to death. They were also asked a lot of questions on their opinions about extramarital affairs, their knowledge of boats, and what they already knew about Laci's case. In this case, the jury was not sequestered. I guess that over half of the people who filled out the questionnaire given to the jury indicated they already believed Scott was guilty just from everything that they had read in the media. This was before the trial had even started. The jury selection process took almost 10 weeks. The trial began on June 4th, 2004. In the prosecutor's opening statements, they said that Scott was very unhappy with his life. He didn't like his job, and he didn't want to be a father. He wanted to be free to sow his oats, sleep with other women, and just be a bachelor. Everything in his life, it would seem, he could fix by getting rid of his wife. The jury was told about Scott's affair with Amber, and then they presented all of the circumstantial evidence, painting a picture to the jury of the kind of guy Scott Peterson was. Interestingly, the prosecutor, a man named Rick DeSato, never came right out and called Scott a killer in his opening statement. He kind of rambled on and on for 4 hours. So he had this really long opening statement that was a little bit boring. And then it was the defense's turn for an opening statement, and Scott's lawyer, Mark Geragos, was a performer. He gets up and he's charismatic and he's entertaining, and everyone is kind of mesmerized by him, and he's on a stage performing for the jury. He says Scott is innocent. He says, yes, Scott cheated on his wife, but cheating on your wife doesn't make you a murderer. He points out the police never even looked at another single suspect. They zeroed in on Scott from day one, and they kind of didn't even look at evidence that pointed to anyone else, because basically, right from the beginning, they knew Scott did it. He told the jury that they would be hearing from multiple eyewitnesses who could testify that they saw Laci walking her dog on Christmas Eve morning, and this would prove that Scott had not killed his wife on the night of the 23rd, like the prosecution was claiming. As the trial began, both sides put up witnesses to try and paint the narrative that they were trying to get the jury to believe. The state put people on the stand who talked about Scott's indifference to his wife and baby going missing. One witness, a cousin of Laci, said that Scott seemed more concerned about police searching his home than he did about the fact that his wife was missing. They reminded the jury that Scott was actively was going on. In fact, in the early weeks of Laci's disappearance, Scott was calling his girlfriend every single day, talking to her as if he didn't have a care in the world. One of the officers who first interrogated Scott was put on the stand, and he told the jury that after Scott, who claimed to have been fishing when Laci went missing, was questioned, he said he couldn't really remember where he had been fishing exactly. He didn't know the type of bait he was using. He didn't even know the type of fish he was out there fishing for. So this guy kind of knew nothing about fishing. They also tell the jury about Scott's boat. He had bought this boat just 2 weeks before Laci went missing. Now, remember how Scott had 4 phones when he was arrested? He also had 4 laptops. I don't know anyone who needs 4 phones and 4 laptops, but police took all of these laptops and searched them. They saw that on December 7th, Scott had been looking, I think it was like classified ads for a fishing boat. But something else interesting had gone down that same day. On December 7th, Scott had been confronted by Empress' friend, who had found out that Scott was married. And this friend basically said, if you don't tell Amber you're married, I will. Scott's super upset. He goes home and begins looking to buy a boat. The very next day, Scott was on his laptop looking at the weather forecast, looking at water conditions, and researching water currents for the San Francisco Bay. Police noticed that Scott was paying special attention to an area called Brooks Island. So they bring in this expert, and they put this expert on the stand who says that if Laci had been put in the water near Brooks Island, her body would have washed up exactly where it did in the bay. The prosecution pointed to Scott's story that Laci had been home watching the Martha Stewart episode about meringue, and how Martha Stewart didn't even talk about meringue on the episode that aired that morning. However, the defense brought that episode in and played it for the jury, and the jury heard Martha Stewart talk about making meringue cookies. They also showed the search history for the computer that was at the Peterson home on the morning of the 24th. Someone had been searching for a flowered umbrella and like a woman's scarf, and they said, look, Laci was obviously alive this morning because Scott wouldn't have been looking on Gap.com at this like woman's scarf and at a flowered umbrella. Also during any other options. They thought it was Scott right from the beginning, and Laci's case was not thoroughly investigated. The defense questioned investigators on the stand and asked them if they had looked for any other suspects. He asked in particular if the homeless people in the area had been looked at, like if any of them had been looked at and ruled out. I guess there was this park where Laci walked her dog every morning, and it was known to have like a pretty big homeless population that slept there at night. So Scott's lawyer is trying to show the jury that anyone in this park that morning could have grabbed Laci, but police didn't even look into this possibility. They didn't even go to the park and ask questions. A detective was put on the stand and asked about Scott's boat and the warehouse where he kept his boat. Now, the prosecution had been saying this was a secret boat. Scott bought it 2 weeks before his wife went missing, and no one knew about it, including Laci. This detective had found a witness who placed Laci at the warehouse where he kept the boat on December 22nd or 23rd. Scott had always claimed his wife knew about the boat. He said they bought it together. So this detective questions a witness who says, yes, I did see Laci Peterson here. He remembers she was 8 months pregnant and she needed to use the restroom, and he told her where it was. Scott's lawyer asked the detective if the person was brought in to be interviewed, this person who saw Laci, and he says yes. And then he said, did you leave this information out of your report? And the detective says yes. Then the defense kind of turned to the jury and was like, see, the police that never looked into anyone else. And not only that, when they found witnesses who had information that went against their narrative, they didn't include it in their reports. So Scott's lawyer is saying, look, this was not a secret boat. Laci was there. They bought the boat together. She, was on the boat, which explains why her hair was found on the boat. Now, the prosecution had earlier said Laci hated boats. She hated being on the water. She got terrible seasickness. But the defense is like, she was in the boat in the warehouse. She would have stepped in it to see that she wouldn't have gotten seasick in the warehouse. The defense then laid out some theories as to who could have been responsible for Laci's death. 6 months before Laci went missing, a 24-year-old who lived in San Francisco named Evelyn Hernandez went missing with her 5-year-old son. She was pregnant when she went missing, just a week before her due date. Her body was also found in the San Francisco Bay in August. So Scott's lawyer tried to connect these two cases. In fact, there were several cases of missing pregnant women in the area around this time. So they kind of laid out all of these pregnant women who had gone missing and tried to show that there could be a serial killer out there who is preying on pregnant women. Laci's family asked to be dismissed when the autopsy photos and testimony were being showed and discussed. Scott's family stand from Scott Peterson's own mouth. The way he was talking to his girlfriend in the days after Laci went missing. Then, the state put up 2 pictures next to each other for the courtroom to see. One of these pictures was of Scott and Amber Fry, arms wrapped around each other at her work Christmas party. The other picture was taken the same night at a different Christmas party, and it was of a pregnant Laci Peterson, all alone, because her husband had told her he was out of town for work. These 2 pictures side by side were a very emotional display of kind of the situation of the marriage. It really showed the jury that Scott didn't want to be with Laci. He wanted to be with his girlfriend. After closing statements, the jurors began to deliberate. Several jurors ended up being removed during deliberations. They found out that one of them had gone home and looked up online the Laci Peterson case. Remember, these jurors were not sequestered, but they had been told not to do that. Then all of the jurors were kind of leaning toward a guilty verdict, except for one juror. And he had very carefully taken all of these notes, and he kept saying, but what about this? But what about this? The other jurors were kind of getting annoyed with him. They were like, look, he's guilty. And it ended up, there was just a lot of bad blood, and this juror ended up asking to be released from his jury duties. On November 12th, 2004, Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder of Laci Peterson and second-degree murder of his son, Connor. During sentencing, Laci's mother took the stand to give a statement, and it was honestly the most heartbreaking thing I have ever read. She said that before Laci and Connor were buried, she had wanted to just have a moment with the bodies. They were in this casket, and she was just sitting there having a last few moments with her daughter's body. And she said that she knew Laci wanted to be buried with Connor, and they had arranged that Connor was laying inside the casket with his mother. But she said she also knew that Laci would have wanted her arms wrapped around her baby. She would have wanted to be buried holding him. But Laci couldn't, because she didn't have any arms. She also looked at Scott during her statement and said divorce was an option. You didn't have to kill them. On December 9th, another mother took the stand, and this time it was Scott's mother, Laci Peterson. She basically begged the jury not to sentence Scott to death. She tells them that he did not deserve to be painted as a devil, that he was a kind and gentle man who had been deeply affected by the murder of his wife and son. Right now, I'm just going to show you a picture of this kind and gentle man who was so deeply hurt by the death of his wife and son. This is Scott during the trial, laughing with his lawyers. Jackie ended her testimony by saying, quote, "If you kill Scott, it would be a whole family wiped off the face of the earth. It would be like Laci never existed." Her testimony was meant to try to blunt the emotional remarks made by Laci's mother. She also talked about how Laci had been like a daughter to her, and she loved her, and while Scott was not perfect, he also loved Laci. this was announced, the crowds that had gathered outside the courtroom cheered. He is currently on death row. On July 6th, 2012, his attorney filed an appeal, basically said, there was not enough evidence. There was no actual evidence other than circumstantial evidence, and this is not enough to put a man to death. In August 2018, Scott's legal team filed their last of 6 written appeals. What this means is that this was Scott's very last chance. The California Supreme Court rejected Scott's claim that he received an unfair trial and affirmed his convictions for the murder of Laci and his unborn son. Now, I tried to give you guys just the facts of the case and not really interject my opinions, but I'm gonna do that now. There's a lot of things I found while researching this that I wanted to talk about now. So, let's talk about Scott's alleged run for the border. He claimed that he had been on a work trip to Mexico in February and he had come back, and if he had wanted to run, he would have just stayed there. And maybe that's the truth, but also he could have been setting himself up. He could have been finding an apartment, kind of checking some places out. That didn't have to be a work trip. That could have been I'm gonna set myself up in Mexico. I also do not believe that Jackie Peterson accidentally withdrew $10,000 from her son's bank account. Whether he was planning on running or not, you cannot accidentally do that. I know that they did show this paper trail in court to explain all of this money away, but I think Scott asked her to do that so that he had the cash on hand in case he did decide to run. Another thing that I found while researching this case was, so I think we all knew how heavily reported on this case was by the media, and I think there was some irresponsible journalism going on. Anything about Scott Peterson or Laci was selling papers at this point, and they started to begin to try to link Scott to other missing people or murders in the area. And I found this newspaper article that talked about how Scott was probably most likely responsible for the disappearance of Kristen Smart. Now, I covered Kristen Smart's case. I will leave the link up above right now. But Kristen Smart and Scott had attended the same college at the same time. He was ruled out as a suspect in the Kristen Smart disappearance, but that didn't stop anyone in the media from really running with the case. During the trial, Scott's computer searches were presented as evidence, and they showed that he had been looking up water currents in the days before Laci went missing. I really do think he was trying to figure out where he could drop a body and have it be washed out to sea and never found again. That is just my opinion, but that's a weird thing to be looking up, I think. Unless I'm wrong. If you're a fisherman and you know a reason why you would need to know water currents and weather patterns and stuff, let me know. I could definitely see checking the weather the day before you go fishing, but not 2 weeks. Scott Peterson's mother's statement during his sentencing made me so mad. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. She said that if Scott died, it would be as if Laci never existed. I don't even understand said that in front of Laci's family. Laci will always have existed, and I don't know, that whole thing just made me so angry. I think that just the bits and pieces that I learned about Scott's mother as researching this, you can kind of see why Scott ended up the way that he was. Here's my opinion on this case. Do I think Scott is guilty? Yes, 100% I do. However, and I have said this with several other cases, I don't think they had enough evidence to prove it. Just because I think he did it, I don't think they had enough to convict him and then sentence him to death. They really only had circumstantial evidence. If you have followed me for a while, you know it is like one of my biggest fears to be like wrongly accused of a crime, any crime. And this is terrifying to think that they could put together a case with all this circumstantial evidence and you would be found guilty. Now, I do think he did it. I think his behavior after Laci went missing, like in my mind, solidifies that he did. Because if he did not do it, he would be freaking out looking for his wife, worried sick. But instead, he's like on the phone with Amber Fry, making sure that that relationship didn't, go bad, or that I think he was calling her all the time to try to gauge if she knew anything, because if their affair came out, that would look very badly for him, and it did. Anyway, as always, I would love to know what you guys think. People are very divided on this case. They really